Good evening, everybody. Welcome to LunaSpeaks Live. This evening we have Maria Rossi with us. She's the founder of the Doula Project based out of Washington County Mental Health Services, where they service at-risk people as well as people based in the Lamoille County area. And I'm going to hand it over to you so you can give us a little bit more of a detailed description of the Doula Project. And yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Sure, thank you. Thanks for having me. My name is Maria Rossi, and I have been in the birth world for about 8 years, doing childbirth education and doula supports. Um, I've been working at Washington County Mental Health, which is based in Washington County, for about 15 years. And I started out working primarily with teenagers, older teenagers, doing support with housing and jobs, case management kind of things. Um, and I started doing doula stuff, birth work on the side, like I said, about 8 years ago. And I really love birth work. And what I really wanted to do was sort of create a space to kind of marry the two worlds of mental health and birth work and provide the same kind of supports or similar supports that families were hiring me for to people regardless of their socioeconomic status. And at times, some of what we call kind of an at-risk population. Um, so the Doula Project was started about, we're going into our 5th year. I've been very, very fortunate to work at Washington County Mental Health and to work with um, a group of professionals who have been really supportive of this idea. And somewhat, I had to be really creative with funding and figuring it all out. And I've been really lucky to have their support. So we're going into our 5th year, and we've served about 150 families, a little bit less in that time here in Washington County. Our space is based in Barrie, but we serve all of Washington County. So the Doula Project is made up of 3 components: prenatal, birth, and postpartum supports. The prenatal supports are really, well, I guess I can say for all 3 of them, we really cater to each person and what it is that they need and really specific to their life. Prenatally, we provide people with childbirth education, parent prep, coordinating services, which is also known as case management in the sort of community mental health setting. So things like help with housing and transportation and finding counselors or doctors, kind of what have you, whatever someone might need in their life. For the birth portion of our program, we have a really, really fortunate to have a pretty amazing collaboration with our local hospital, Central Vermont Medical Center. And so we utilize a scholarship program that they offer to pay our doulas for their time at CVMC. We do provide support to people in other hospitals, but they do look a little different because we don't have the same sort of funding, which is something we're going after. In postpartum, people are, well, I should say during birth, people are obviously offered, which is sort of the crux of our whole program, are offered doula supports. And it looks very similar to traditional doula supports, and it also looks a little different. And the way that it looks different is it's definitely a more intensive kind of support, whereas doulas are usually meeting with families, 2-3 times prior to birth. We're meeting with our clients, our participants, much, much more, and doing a lot of sort of like life management before they have their baby. So by the time we get to the birth, they do know us pretty well, and we generally have really established relationships. Um, and then after the baby is born, we provide postpartum supports. So that looks different for everybody, but for the sort of most part, it's about weekly in-home postpartum visiting, similar to postpartum doula supports, and a little bit different too. We have a special emphasis on early attachment and on, infant development. We also have groups, both prenatally and postpartum. Our postpartum groups tend to be a little bit better attended and a little bit richer. You know, I think the babies offer people a great way to connect with other people when they feel a little awkward when they're just pregnant. Um, so, you know, that's kind of how the program is set up. And do you want me to keep going, or do you want to pause and ask
Um,
questions?
yeah, I feel like you just offered a lot of really rich material. So, as a professional doula, what have you experienced as being the difference of continuity of connection, just really being engaged in somebody's life who's receiving services, whereas private pay doulas have, you know, that basically 2 prenatals and 1 postpartum into the contract? Yeah, I'm curious to hear from your experience.
Well, on average, our staff spends about 35 hours per participant. So that gives us definitely a richer perspective on their life. Most of our participants have, you know, or many of them have really complex social issues. Domestic violence, addiction issues, you know, generational poverty are some examples, but it certainly doesn't end there. And so the doula is really kind of switching hats often in a more of a social work or community mental health sort of role to a doula role. And it is really important to me, and I can think for my staff too, but it was really important to me in building the program, and it's really important to me going forward that everybody sort of carry that kind of doula heart with them with everything that they do. Um, and so I would say that to answer your question, it's more intensive. And there is, I guess, probably a more of a long-term relationship. That said, we do, there are, it's not just me, I have other staff, and we do try to support each other and all sort of support everybody who is involved with the Doula Project between group supports and meeting each other for a couple of different reasons. I mean, one of the reasons is that if something happens and, you know, one of my staff can't do something for somebody, that one of us can step in and it doesn't feel really awkward. Um, and they feel like they can trust us. And and then the other reason, you know, I think it happens in birth and it definitely happens in mental health, and it's sort of disempowering to families in a different way, is that when we I'll kind of leave this space to allow people to focus on us as like their primary support, and it kind of takes away from the fact that they're doing it themselves. And so we really try to support kind of as a group, support the whole group. And sometimes that might mean that we step in for each other, or that a person might call me and be looking for something instead of their sort of primary doula, and that's okay. So I think the relationship is more long term, and we try to sort of approach it from like a group perspective.
Yeah, that's really interesting because from the mental health perspective, there tends to be these really clear boundaries in terms of involving oneself professionally in people's intimate lives. And yet, birth is probably the most intimate experience there
Yeah,
is.
I think that has actually been a little challenging for a lot of people to sort of wrap their brains around. And you know, of course, we still have to have very good boundaries, and um, and sometimes we have to enforce those in a way that people may not at first like, and it's okay. And and I think that something that, you know, there are so many wonderful programs out there, and there's so much support for families and for mothers. And the one thing that no other provider can do is support at a birth. And so, and there's something, you know, as any doula knows, or anybody who attends births, midwives, OBs, nurses, anybody who attends birth on a regular basis knows that something really special happens. And it usually creates a bond with the people who are there providing you with the support. And so I think that that bond carries out past the birth and supports people to stay engaged with the supports. I think oftentimes we see after people have their baby in a lot of different programs, they kind of like fall off a little bit of supports. Like they, you know, it's really overwhelming. It's all, they have a lot of appointments and maybe the baby needs certain things. They have other children. And so really actually when they need the most supports is when they're most reluctant to get them because it feels overwhelming. And we have a pretty good, pretty consistent, people follow through pretty consistently. We can follow people up to a year. Not everybody utilizes that whole year, but people do for, you know, at least probably 6 months. And some people do go the full year too. And so, yeah.
Yeah, that's really very different. So when you say you work with people up to a year afterwards, can you describe what you mean by that?
Sure. I mean, primarily, well, I guess it depends. So one of the things that we offer people is in-home postpartum visiting. And that's a lot of what you might see with postpartum doula supports. It is a little different because we do have to have a little bit more boundaries around those things. So we can't like watch people's children and things like that, but we can be there and sort of help them do the task they need to do. And we also offer support at pediatrician appointments, which is also usually really helpful to people, especially in the first 2 weeks, month after the birth, making sure that they get to the appointment, offering them support at the appointment, helping them communicate with the pediatrician. I should say we offer that prenatally too, and people, we usually are attending people's prenatal appointments with them. Um, so help making sure that people get to their 6 week checkup. You know, I think the latest statistic I heard from Postpartum International was that 40% of people don't make it to their 6 week checkup, which is pretty high. And so that's a measure of health. And so we are helping people, supporting people to do that, which I think is really important. Um,
And
we
was
also,
that, sorry, what were you going to say?
that's okay. Go ahead. What were you going to ask?
Was that statistic of the 40% specific to a demographic, or is that just in general?
No, it was just actually what I heard at the Postpartum International, um, Postpartum Support International uh, conference that we had a couple of months ago in Burlington. One of the trainers had said that, you know, so I can't actually cite that data, but she did say that in
Okay.
that context of, you know, people getting postpartum support.
Yeah. You know, a lot of the problems that some of the clients of the Doula Project face on a daily basis are also problems that are just really prevalent in society, but maybe some people, for example, let's say domestic violence, that might be experienced in a number of homes. Is that your kiddo?
I forgot to warn anybody that was recorded.
Okay, yeah, so domestic violence is a problem that's not just, doesn't just affect people who are low income, it affects people across the entire spectrum. And yet, there are people who maybe have a lot of affluence but experience domestic violence and don't have those pieces of support. I'm just wondering if you could comment on your experience with that and sort of that trend or that, yeah, you're nodding. I think you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, of course, all violence against women crosses all socioeconomic, um, across the board, right, and all races. And I mean, if it were up to me, then everybody would be afforded the same sort of intensive supports if they needed them that we could offer. And unfortunately, because of funding limitations, we're really confined to offering only people who receive Medicaid assistance and who qualify for community mental health services. But absolutely, you know, it would be ideal to have that kind of support available to all women. And people actually ask me that a lot. Um, Maybe not necessarily domestic violence, but just birth supports, just doula supports. Like, and I mean, if I had it my way, all of the things that we can offer people who have I guess, the highest needs, we could offer everybody as a prevention. And I mean, I really do believe that birth is um, somewhat of an overlooked time for pregnancy and birth for early interventions, to really make sure that people are clued in and shored up to where they need to be at that time.
Well, let's hear your thoughts on that topic, a little bit more detailed. Like, what is it to be prepared and to be ready, queued up, and yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess I know anybody will tell you you can't really prepare, whether it's your first baby or your fourth baby. You've never had that baby, and you can't really prepare for what's ahead without knowing the child you're going to have, and knowing how it's going to sort of impact your life and all of those things. But there are certainly some things that we could ideally put into place for people to support them in terms of just in terms of like doula supports, in terms of people being connected to the right counselors if they need it, to having primary care providers if they need them, to whatever that means for them, having spaces to talk and explore the really hard things that come up, all of the taboos that go along with the challenges of becoming a parent, especially becoming a mother. We just, nobody really talks about how hard those things are, and I think that's not really a secret to anybody. Um, but in whatever way each family could use, I don't think that a lot of families are really hooked in their, they are in sort of like a lot of superficial ways, but we just don't really prepare people, and people don't even know how to get kind of like hooked into the emotional supports that they might need.
Gotcha. Yeah, so that's very parallel, like that those boundaries of the demographic that you serve based on the Medicaid limitations versus just the general public who may qualify for Medicaid or not. It seems like there's a lot of overlap in terms of how supporting can affect like the entire spectrum of the demo of the the different types of people. Um, so I'm just wondering, for a mom who's listening to this, how, like, what can she, a mom who is not reliant on Medicaid or enrolled with the Doula Project, um, maybe she even has a supportive partner, a couple of kids, more like of the birth love family demographic. What can these this type of woman learn from the type of woman that the Doula Project serves? I know that's such a big question, and I'm sure it's totally dependent on each individual person. Um, or if it's easier to answer, what gems have you learned? That could be another approach to my lofty question. I hope you
Yeah.
can take it from
Oh
there.
God, this is a really big question, and I feel like I could. I mean, I to talk about what I've learned is I mean, even um, hard to even know where to begin. Uh, I think one of the biggest things, when I was having from a personal perspective, when I was having my children, I was very, very lucky in that I had supportive family. I had, an incredible midwife. I had friends. I had enough of what I needed monetarily. I had a home, all of those things. And it was still, of course, hard. I had my own stuff come up that was challenging and all of those. Um, and what I've learned from the women who I work with at the Doula Project, um, I mean, they remind me all of the time of the deep gratitude for what I do have. And some of the things that, you know, some of the things that we think of, I think, as necessary, making a birth plan, for example, something that I've really kind of come to believe is that even the act of making a birth plan is a place of privilege. And when you're not in survival mode, you have space in your heart and in your mind to think about what it is that you want, to envision what it is that you want for yourself, for your baby, for your family. And a lot of the women that we're working with, and this isn't everybody, there are women and there are some that we're working with who are so in survival mode, um, that having that sort of space and freedom is not something that's afforded to them. It's not on their radar. And it, that was like kind of an aha moment for me, you know, when I sort of was like, wow, we can't do this all of the time because their lives are so big. And so sitting down and talking about what interventions you may or may not be open to is like the last sort of necessary thing that's needed when you don't know where you're living, or you don't know how you're going to get food, or, you know, your trauma is so intense and so deep that you're faced with it every day, all day. uh, that's really survival mode. And so I think that that's one of the things that I've really learned is really sort of just a deep gratitude, and putting things in perspective a little bit about what I have. And and that's really personal to me. I think that and I also can see, because we do work, that's not everyone we work with, and we do work with a really wide range of people, in terms of ages, and in terms of life functioning, and in terms of family makeup. Uh, you know, I also have been able to kind of see what there are some things that everybody needs, and everybody needs community. Everybody needs other parents. Um, Everybody needs family, but whatever that means to them, not necessarily blood family, sometimes not. Everybody needs those things. And the women that I've worked with over the years, whether, you know, both people who have hired me privately and could do so, you know, 10 times over, versus people who don't have a home and don't have any food, you know, that's sort of everyone in between. I think that's universal for everybody. And so I would encourage any mom, any birthing person out there, in terms of what can I do to, you know, support myself, or to sort of get myself ready. There's going to be so many unknowns, and you can't even imagine and fathom the questions you're going to have right now. But what you can do is you can hopefully do your best to form like a community around you. And I mean, I guess that sort of falls into everything that you've been trying to do, which is, you know, I think invaluable to people. Um, and uh, and the people who really like engage uh, them in the most meaningful way at the Doula Project are those people who are coming to groups on a somewhat regular basis, and people who are connecting to each other outside of our groups, who are like able to form friendships. And those people, I think, have postpartum wise, are have are connecting in a really meaningful way, and tend to be more stable. And sometimes, you know, people, when you're more stable, you can do more connecting. So there's that too. Yeah.
That seems like an upward spiral out of survival mode, that bonds that, I mean, from a biochemical perspective, we know collectively that the oxytocin hormone that's released that generates bonding between the mother and infant is also experienced with everybody who's in the birth room. And that's also something that's experienced when there are women's circles, or just any groups of people speaking and communicating with each other on an emotional level. So that is so profound, the way that people can support each other once they're out of that survival mode. So, in your experience, how does serving as a doula help mothers transition out of fight, flight, immobilize?
Well, that's a big question too. I think that birth has this power to what I like to say to people when they after they've given birth is that if you ever doubt yourself again, you need to remember this moment. And I feel like that can be really carried on into someone's whole life if they can really absorb that. Of course, that's not quick, and it doesn't mean that you never have doubt again or any of there. Nothing is magic, um, but I think that when someone has an experience, whatever that means to them, that they feel respected and they feel proud of their birth, and they feel well supported in that space. I do believe that that carries people or has the potential to carry out into other parts of their lives. I mean, I think that you see that, and when you talk to women, you oftentimes hear people say things just anecdotally, like, when I became a mother, everything changed. And that maybe not everything changes, but that sort of, for a lot of people, it is a time where suddenly your perception of yourself kind of changes. And over time, when that's nurtured um, with positive people and confidence and, you know, making mistakes and getting up and trying again, it does have the power and the potential to, you know, sort of take flight in all parts of your life. I mean, I think that for myself, I don't think I would ever be in this position if I hadn't become a mother. And I think there's a lot of women out there who who feel similar. So
So,
hopefully,
no,
hopefully our what we do at the Doula Project, or just even as a doula, is being a piece of that. And we're not going to be everything, but being a piece of that. And so, yeah.
that's really beautiful, and it's so awesome to hear that you're able to offer this peacefulness or this spaciousness for people to form bonds of trust and start to re-experience themselves opening up to their potential as a human being and as a mother. Have you experienced any women whose trauma is so deep that maybe somebody who drastically altered their brain from the use of substances, that oxytocin actually was like significantly lacking, or just like their brain chemistry was so altered that the normal hormones that kick in to help quell pain, um, the ones that help with bonding, the ones that help open, just have you experienced anything where there's been any kind of limitations from substance abuse, I should say?
um, do you mean during birth itself, or do you mean like in parenting and beyond?
Yes, I meant in the actual labor and delivery.
Well, I mean, we've definitely experienced people. I think there's a couple of different like parts of the answers that I have. A couple of answers that I have. One is that when for some women, when they experience a lot of trauma or any trauma at all, the body doesn't forget, right? And so what person A interprets as like a stubbed toe, person B interprets as a broken foot in terms of level of pain. And obviously, like, I'm talking about birth, but so I think that there are times when people have a lot or some trauma that they either haven't worked through, or it, for whatever reason, just hits in this way that was unexpected, or maybe it was expected, um, that they have a really difficult time managing pain. I mean, I have seen instances where I'm thinking of one person in particular, or a couple people actually, where they just were like, I'm not gonna labor, and they were in labor. I mean, it was forced on them. They had pitocin, but they were like, I'm not gonna do it, and they didn't. And both in both those situations, they ended up having a cesarean, and maybe that was what they needed to feel safe. Um, so whether or not that was, brain chemistry or and some sort of like hormonal thing, possibly. I don't obviously can't say for certain. And I, we do know oxytocin, obviously we know plays a really big role in birth, and when people are able to connect with their partner or with another person in that really loving way, that tends to help things along. I think, sometimes I wonder about the women that we've worked with who don't have that in their lives, not necessarily even a partner, just like a loving natural support that will touch them and love them and hug them and hold them and those kinds of things, be it a mother or a sister or a friend or a partner or whatever. I wonder about how that affects their labor, if that affects their labor. I have no way of knowing for certain. Um, and but I think it's a kind of a fascinating question. Um, and beyond that, I mean, we have had women who, I don't know if it's for, I can't say it's from substance abuse. I think the women that we work with who are engaged with us who have had substance abuse work probably the hardest that I have ever seen any mother work. But there are definitely women who have their trauma is so sort of embedded in their being, that they're unable to parent long term. And we've definitely had women who have not been able to maintain parenting and have lost their children to custody. That hasn't happened very often. And not to say that DCF has never been involved, because sometimes they've been involved, but things resolve themselves and people get the supports that they need and they're able to move on. But we have had a couple of instances where, just parenting really wasn't an option in terms of safety. And I think that that is primarily trauma related, and lots of other things too. But yeah.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go with that as well, is people who you've noticed who were unable to accept any kind of loving touch into their experience, probably, although you're right, we can't know for sure, but probably based on their own experiences of trauma, maybe even their own infancy, or maybe even how their mother gave birth, how that would play out in that early infancy stage. It sounds like in some of those more extreme cases, DCF becomes involved. Um, so, what about an experience where somebody changed, the birth and becoming a mother really changed them, where it allowed them to open up and heal some of the trauma that they had?
I mean, I think that does happen too. I mean, it's not overnight, and I think that, but when people have an experience that they feel really proud of, they do take that with them. And something, my perspective is that, and I'm not them, so I can't speak for them, but my perspective is that something kind of begins to heal in them. And it's not magic. It's not, like I said, not overnight, but it kind of gives them, something begins to heal, and they may not even notice it right away, but maybe over time it becomes, an increased confidence or an increased awareness, or something sort of dissipates or relaxes, or something like that. So I think that, for a lot of women, especially the women that we work with who are in treatment, they're already really motivated, because they're in treatment, and that's really hard. And oftentimes we see after, the baby's born, they really become even, and it's actually like a risky time for relapse, but most of them, I would say, become even more sort of focused on um, on maintaining their treatment, on parenting well, on commitment to their children and to their families. And I should say too, in terms of substance use and addiction, people who are sort of in the thick of it are most likely not going to engage with us. They're not really in a headspace where they're accepting that kind of support. And so it's not very often that we see somebody who is sort of in the depths of addiction. Um, they have babies, but generally, they're not accepting our supports. Um, and yeah, so we're really seeing people when because they're ready to accept them. So that's they did that.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. That's helpful for this conversation. So then, since we have some birth professionals who will be watching this video and also who are watching live right now, what are your tools of empathy that you offer to professionals who are working with people who have trauma, even if it's a small amount of trauma, like most of us tend to carry anyway?
Yeah, yes, we all do. We all have our stuff. Um, Gosh, we work really hard to train people. I special train our doulas, and I've had both experiences in that I've kind of like plucked doulas out of the birth world and kind of immersed them in the mental health world, and provided them with like a lot of support and training. And then alternatively, had people already working in mental health who have become doulas. And I don't know that one necessarily works better than the other. I think a lot of it is um, people's individual personalities and strengths. Uh, and I think doulas by nature are very empathetic people. And most doulas that I've met really strive to be as non judgmental and open as they can be. Uh, and so I think that in that way, most of the time people who are choosing birth sort of already have that heart about them. And oh, and so but we do trainings, and we attend as many trainings as we can because we're in community mental health. It really does afford us the opportunity to attend trainings, specifically about domestic violence, for example, or specifically about women and newborns who the special needs of women and newborns for mothers who are in opiate addiction treatment. And so we've been able to do those kinds of trainings that aren't always either they're not always available or known about, and it's not even that people would say they couldn't come. It's just that they just are kind of only known about in community partners, and so we're able to access a lot of those. And then of course we have like readings we recommend and all of those kinds of things.
Are there any protocols that you've developed based around some of those trainings for how you engage with your clients during some of the private sessions?
Well, boundaries are really important, and I think that it looks a little different than traditional doula supports. I think a lot of times people build friendships out of the people that they provide doula supports with, which is beautiful, and and we have to have a little bit more boundaries because we're in community mental health, and things, privacy is of the utmost importance, even more so, and so, and we really aren't encouraged to become friends or become Facebook friends and stuff like that with people who are enrolled in the program, and for privacy reasons a lot of the time. Um, and so we do have things that we try to do at certain times, in terms of like childbirth ed and making sure that they've seen the birthing unit and those kinds of things. But that's more of like a program.
Sure. Do you recommend for doulas that they ask ask their clients about domestic violence or about their trauma or about addiction or any of those sensitive subjects directly, or do you suggest that doulas just kind of listen for the sounds in between so that doulas can know if they should be treating somebody with more awareness or greater empathy or greater compassion or something like that?
Well, I know that that's sort of like a hot question in the doula world. It's my opinion that you do not ask unless you know what you're going to do with the information. And so if you feel really confident that you would know what to do if someone said, like, I'm experiencing domestic violence, then you probably shouldn't ask directly. That said, even just, I think it's better practice to learn how to read between the lines than it is to ask directly. I mean, asking directly, I think you are very likely to alienate someone very fast. And if they're not ready to talk to you about it. And and it's very individual in terms of your own, how do you read between the lines? And sometimes that's really hard, but learning your own education to learn about maybe signs of domestic violence or addiction or, um, trauma. And I don't think that most people, my experience is that when people are asked directly, the first reaction is defensiveness, and they pull away really fast. And when you can sort of develop your own sort of protocol in terms of how you approach people, whether it's always with a certain watchful eye or what kind of lens you're looking at it through, and develop and educate yourself on like what you would do when you came up with someone who needed extra supports or different supports than what you offer as a doula.
So we have a question in from Rose, and she's wondering if there's an appropriate way to verbally say something like, quote, I'm here for you, end quote, in terms, I'm guessing she's meaning in terms of hearing between the lines. So she hasn't been told direct information, or maybe she has been told something direct, how to respond to that so that the person can feel that connection with their doula.
I don't know if the word, I'm going to plug my phone in. Hang on one sec. I'm sorry.
No problem. That's a really great question, Rose. Thanks for asking.
I don't know if the words are as important as like the feeling behind them. So if I came across somebody who I could sort of read between the lines that something else was going on, be it domestic violence or whatever, a social situation, I actually think that saying I'm here for you is really nice and just being really open about that, and like, or asking what can I do, what is helpful to you, or any of those kinds of things. I think people actually respond really well to the directness, and I would say probably the thing that people respond to the least is feeling like you feel bad for them. And so whatever you can do to not communicate something like pity or feeling sorry for somebody, because nobody wants to feel that way. It makes you feel like a burden. And commending them on whatever else they're doing that's like wonderful and right. Does that answer your question?
I think that was a great answer. We're having a little bit of trouble with the volume. It kind of changed.
I don't know. It doesn't look like it's changed on my end.
Okay, we can still hear you fine. It's just there's a different sound quality to your voice. So we can sort of start to wrap things up a little bit, is there anything that comes to your mind that was left unsaid that you were like really thinking about or pondering tonight?
I don't think so. I think that if any, I don't think so.
Okay. So how can any doulas or birth professionals who would like to learn from the Doula Project, or who would like to learn some of the tools of signs of trauma, what resources do you have available for these professionals?
Well, I would say it depends a little bit on where you live. Most counties in the state have pretty, like I know Washington County and Lamoille and Chittenden County, and I think whatever county Brattleboro. But there's pretty tight-knit communities of support. And so if there's a way to find out what's in your community in terms of support with something like, what are the moms who are struggling with opiate addiction, like where do they go? What do they do? Who are their providers? And figuring out what's out there, because if you do a little digging, you'll probably be able to find that there are a lot of opportunities, maybe even free, that you would be welcome at. And you might be able to find a list of them. Like the Department of Health might have some of them. And if you just if there's a domestic violence training around the state called I'm forgetting what it's called right now. Like it came out a couple of years ago. I'll remember and I'll get back to you when I remember what it is, but I think it's called like healthy baby. No, I don't remember, but I'll find out. I'll get back to you what it's called.
Yeah, when you do remember, I'll put it in the description of the video.
Yeah, that's one example of a training that I know has been kind of bopped around the state, and it's been for any providers who are, and I think it was free. If it wasn't free, it was pretty inexpensive, who might be, come in contact with people who are struggling with domestic violence in some way in their life. And when we had it in Washington County, I just told some doulas, and we called the Department of Health, and we were like, can we come? And they were more than happy to have more people there, with the understanding that that's a population that they might not always reach otherwise. So that does happen. And sometimes DCF, Department of Children and Families, will have trainings on children in foster care and infants in foster care. And, that's another place you might find trainings about special needs of that population. And oftentimes, if you call and you say, explain who you are, they're more than happy to have you come. It's just a matter of finding them, and they're really county specific. So that's where it gets a little tricky. Every county is a little bit different in terms of how robust it is and what they offer.
Thank you. That's
I would love, if there's anybody listening or who will listen who is connected to another one of the designated agencies in the state. Washington County Mental Health is one of the designated agencies, and some of the other ones are like the Howard Center, and there's a bunch. North, there's a bunch of different ones, but and I would love to see additional programs similar to or like the Doula Project within the designated agencies, because I think that is a way that we can serve this more at-risk population that otherwise aren't going to get doula support.
There is the doula program at Lund.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one that's getting started at UVM as well. As the individual doula in training, I contacted my local parent-child center and volunteered there. but I was alone, so I did that alone.
And I think that's something that's really, one of the things that I feel really proud about the Doula Project is our collaboration with our local hospital. And I mean, it's been invaluable to us as educationally and relationship wise. And I think we've added a lot of value to them as well. But also, one of the things that is phenomenal is that they recognize that it's something that you have to pay for. And I think that that's just kind of, it's sort of mind blowing because it doesn't happen. And one of the struggles that I think all doulas go through is that it's not a livable wage. And people really want to help all different kinds of people. And it's just not possible without to always be volunteering. And volunteering certainly has its place. I've volunteered many, many times and will continue to do so when I feel compelled. And nobody can make their whole living on that. And so being able to, work on programs that find ways, for a doula to get paid as well as provide a service would really be pretty awesome.
I hear you, and I agree, and I think that's great that you have your program is able to offer compensation, because that is important, especially for people who are professionals and they're offering their time and services. Thank you for that. So what about anybody who'd like to stay in touch with the Doula Project? Where can they find you? Anybody who may want to make a donation or follow up with you?
Sure. Well, we're on Facebook, kind of. I'm not very good at updating it. But anyone's welcome to email me or call me. Email is probably better. And if anybody wants to, make a donation, that's amazing. And I should say, too, we have had people make donations, which is really incredible. And what we do with all of the donation money is use it to pay doulas for births at different hospitals. But that can be found on the Washington County Mental Health website or on our Facebook
page. And your Facebook page is facebook.com/the Doula Project VT.
Yeah, and the VT is important. Because there's like another page and it got all confusing.
Okay, so definitely be sure if you're looking up the Doula Project that you type facebook.com/the Doula Project VT, short for Vermont. Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything else we should say before we sign off?
I don't think so.
Okay. Yeah, you're welcome. It was a pleasure to learn from you, and I hope that this video recording helps many people.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Blessings. Bye.
Bye.